Awareness of impulsive actions is not a skill you suddenly acquire one day. It is a moment you survive, a silent collision between who you thought you were and what you keep doing when no one is watching. And if you are listening to this right now, there's a high chance you already know exactly what I'm talking about, because impulsive action does not announce itself loudly. It whispers, it rushes, it disguises itself as confidence, urgency, intuition, or even courage. And before your mind has time to ask a single honest question, your body has already moved, clicked, spoken, reacted, decided, and only afterward comes the familiar echo, that subtle heaviness in the chest, the quiet sentence you don't want to finish. Why did I do that again? This is where awareness begins, not in control, not in discipline, but in that raw aftertaste of regret mixed with confusion. Because impulsive behavior is rarely about stupidity or lack of intelligence. It is about unobserved emotion moving faster than consciousness. It is about a part of you that learned long ago that speed feels safer than stillness, that action feels better than uncertainty, that doing something feels more powerful than sitting with the discomfort of not knowing. Think about the last impulsive decision you made. Don't justify it. Don't explain it. Don't analyze it yet. Just remember the sensation right before it happened. There was a tightening somewhere, maybe in your jaw, maybe in your chest, maybe in your stomach. There was a thought that felt urgent and unquestionable, a story that said, now or never. And that moment is the doorway most people never stop to look at, because society rewards fast movers, decisive talkers, bold risk takers, but it rarely teaches the difference between conscious action and emotional escape. Impulsivity is not randomness. It is patterned, predictable, and deeply personal. It shows up strongest where your identity feels threatened, where your self-worth feels unstable, where waiting feels like losing, and awareness means you stop judging the behavior and start listening to what it is protecting. Many people believe awareness means stopping the impulse, but that belief alone creates more inner conflict because you cannot stop what you do not understand, and you cannot understand what you are constantly trying to suppress. Awareness is not resistance. It is observation without aggression. It is the ability to slow down internally, even if the external world keeps moving fast. It is noticing the microsecond gap between stimulus and response and choosing to stay there just a little longer than you are used to. Right now, as you hear these words, once awareness begins to form, something uncomfortable happens that most people are not prepared for. You start noticing how often impulsive actions are not reactions to the present moment, but echoes of unfinished emotional business from the past. And this is where many people unconsciously turn away, because seeing clearly means you can no longer pretend you didn't know. Impulse is rarely about what is happening now. It is about what this moment reminds your nervous system of, a familiar emotional pattern seeking resolution through speed. When you slow down enough to observe the impulse without acting, you may feel a rising restlessness, an agitation that feels almost unbearable. And this is the truth no one tells you. Impulsive action is often chosen not because it feels good, but because it ends discomfort quickly. Awareness asks you to stay with the discomfort long enough to understand it, and that feels threatening to parts of you that learn survival through immediate action. Notice how the body reacts when an impulse is interrupted. The mind becomes louder, more convincing, more dramatic. It produces reasons, logic, urgency, stories of regret if you don't act now. And this is the test, not of strength, but of honesty. Ask yourself in that moment, is this impulse aligned with who I want to become, or is it aligned with what I am trying to avoid feeling? This single question, when asked sincerely, creates a pause powerful enough to change trajectories. Awareness is not passive, it is active witnessing. It requires courage to watch your own internal storms without seeking shelter in reaction. Many impulsive actions are driven by an identity that fears stillness, because stillness exposes uncertainty, and uncertainty threatens the illusion of control. You may notice that impulsivity spikes when outcomes matter deeply, when validation feels scarce, when your sense of self is tied to performance, results, or external approval. In those moments, impulsive action feels like taking back control, but in reality, it hands control over to unexamined emotion. Awareness helps you see that true control is not about speed, It is about choice, and choice only exists where awareness. As awareness stabilizes, you begin to confront a truth that reshapes how you see yourself. Impulsive actions are not random flaws. They are expressions of unmet needs that never learned a language. And when a need has no language, it's through behavior. It speaks through behavior. This is why logic alone never dissolves impulsivity, because logic speaks to the mind while impulse is born in the body. When you become deeply aware, you start to feel the impulse not as a command, but as a message, and messages ask to be understood, not obeyed. There is a subtle but critical shift here. Instead of asking, "What should I do?" you start asking, "What is happening inside me right now?" And this question moves you from reaction to relationship with yourself. Many people fear this stage of awareness because it dismantles the identity of being decisive, bold, fast, always moving forward, and reveals something more vulnerable underneath. A human being who sometimes acts quickly because slowing down feels unsafe. Awareness does not weaken you, it humbles you, and humility is the ground where real strength grows. You may notice that when you don't act on an impulse, the emotion beneath it intensifies before it softens. Anxiety may spike, restlessness may grow, self-doubt may speak louder. And this is the moment where most people return to old patterns, not because they want to, but because they have not yet learned to trust that emotions are temporary when allowed to move through without interference. Awareness teaches patience at the level of sensation. It shows you that feelings rise, peak, and fall just like impulses do, and that you do not disappear if you let them pass. This realization rewires your relationship with fear, because fear loses its urgency when you no longer believe it requires immediate action to survive. You start to experience a new kind of confidence, not the loud confidence of quick decisions, but the quiet confidence of knowing you can sit with discomfort and still remain intact. This confidence changes how you act in the world. Your actions become fewer but more precise, slower but more aligned, and people around you may not understand the change at first because they were used to your reactions, not your presence. Awareness also at this stage of awareness, you may begin to notice something paradoxical. The more conscious you become, the more clearly you see how often impulsive actions once gave you a sense of identity, momentum, even meaning. Letting go of impulsivity is not just changing behavior, it is releasing a version of yourself that believed movement was the same as progress. This can feel like a quiet identity loss, a subtle emptiness where constant reaction used to live. And if you are not prepared for it, you may mistake this emptiness for failure or stagnation. In reality, it is space, and space is necessary for intentional creation. Awareness teaches you to tolerate this space without filling it prematurely. You start to understand that impulsive action often served as emotional noise, drowning out deeper questions you were not ready to answer, questions about purpose, direction, authenticity, and fear. When impulsivity quiets down, those questions surface, and they demand honesty rather than speed. This is where many people unconsciously sabotage their awareness, because facing these questions requires vulnerability, and vulnerability feels risky to a system trained to protect itself through action. Notice how the urge to do something intensifies when uncertainty increases, and see if you can remain present with that urge without acting on it. This is not passivity, it is restraint with intention, and restraint is one of the highest forms of power. As awareness deepens, you begin to feel a different relationship with time. Moments no longer feel like enemies you must conquer, but opportunities you can engage with deliberately. This shift reduces the internal pressure that once drove impulsive decisions, because you no longer believe everything must be resolved immediately. You start to see that many impulsive actions were attempts to force closure where patience was actually required. Awareness allows you to leave things open without anxiety, to trust that clarity unfolds when given space. There is also a relational aspect to impulsivity that becomes visible here, how quick reactions may have shaped your interactions, your conflicts, your communication, sometimes creating intensity where understanding was needed. With awareness, you begin to listen more deeply, not just to others, but to your own internal responses, and this listening changes the quality of your presence. People may notice that you are calmer, less reactive, more grounded, and some may resist this change, because your old impulsivity may have fit into familiar dynamics. Awareness asks you to stay true to your internal alignment. There comes a point in awareness where you realize that impulsive actions were not only about escaping discomfort, they were also about avoiding responsibility for your deeper direction in life. When you act impulsively, you live in fragments, moment to moment, reaction to reaction. And in that fragmentation, you never have to fully confront the question, where am I actually going? Awareness begins to stitch these fragments together, and with that stitching comes accountability. This can feel heavy at first because now your choices are no longer accidental. They are seen, owned, and felt. You start to notice that when you slow down, your actions carry more weight, and weight can feel intimidating to a nervous system accustomed to light, fast movement. But this weight is not burden, it is meaning. Meaning arises when actions are aligned with intention rather than impulse. At this stage, awareness becomes less about monitoring impulses and more about sensing alignment. You feel when something is right, not because it is urgent, but because it is calm, grounded, and steady. This is a radical shift because many people confuse excitement with truth, adrenaline with intuition. Awareness teaches you the difference. Intuition is quiet and consistent. Impulse is loud and impatient. As you learn to trust this quieter signal, your life begins to reorganize itself around fewer but more intentional choices. You may do less, but what you do carries depth, and depth creates fulfillment that impulsivity never sustained. There is also a new form of interaction that emerges between you and your inner world. Instead of commanding yourself to change, you collaborate with yourself. When an impulse arises, you no longer feel the need to crush it or obey it. You acknowledge it, thank it for its message, and choose consciously. This respectful internal dialogue builds self-respect, and self-respect reduces the need for impulsive validation. You begin to see how impulsivity once functioned as a way to feel alive, to feel something intense in moments of numbness or monotony. Awareness does not remove intensity from life, it refines it, replacing chaotic spikes with sustained vitality. You become more present, not just in moments of decision, but in ordinary moments, and this presence itself becomes satisfying. As you listen now, consider how often you rushed not because you had to, but because slowing down would have forced you to feel something you were avoiding. Awareness invites you to feel it now, gently, without. And now we arrive at the place most people never reach, not because it is hidden, but because it is quiet, the place where awareness of impulsive actions turns into a lived relationship with yourself. At this level, awareness is no longer something you do, it is something you inhabit. You begin to sense impulses the way you sense weather, without panic, without urgency, with respect for their presence, but no obligation to obey them. This is where inner authority is born. You no longer ask the world, your emotions, or your past for permission to act. You consult yourself. And that consultation is calm, grounded, and honest. Impulses still arise. They always will, but they no longer hijack your identity. They pass through you instead of driving you. This is the freedom most people search for externally, but it can only be built internally. At this stage, you may notice a deepening intimacy with your inner life. You catch yourself mid-impulse, and instead of reacting, you smile inwardly, not with arrogance, but with recognition. I know you. And in that knowing, the impulse softens. This is not suppression, it is maturity. You have learned that awareness is not about being perfect, it is about being present. There will still be moments you act too quickly, speak too fast, decide too soon, but now those moments become teachers instead of punishments. You reflect, you learn, you integrate, and you move forward without self-betrayal. This is the quiet revolution inside you. I want you to pause for a moment and ask yourself, not rhetorically, but sincerely, what would change in your life if you trusted yourself enough to pause before acting? Who would you become if you no longer needed urgency to feel alive? What kind of peace might emerge if your actions came from alignment instead of impulse? Let these questions land, not in your mind, but in your body. Feel where they resonate, where they challenge you, where they invite you. This is the interaction between you and this moment, between awareness and choice. You are not being asked to change everything today. You are being invited to notice one impulse, just one, and stay with it long enough to understand it. That is how transformation begins, not in dramatic decisions, but in small moments of presence repeated over time. Awareness of impulsive actions ultimately returns you to yourself, to a place where you are no longer running from your inner world or chasing relief in action. You stand with yourself steady, awake, and honest. And from that place, every action you take carries a different energy, an energy of integrity, intention, and self-respect. This is not a destination, it is a practice, one you return to again and again, each time with more compassion and clarity. If you are listening to this and feeling seen, challenged, or unsettled, that is not discomfort to escape. That is awareness doing its work. Stay with it. Let it reshape you quietly. Because the moment you become aware of your impulses, you are no longer ruled by them. You are in relationship with them. And that relationship is the foundation of a life lived consciously, deliberately, and deeply true to who you are. Appreciate your time here. These moments are for observing yourself, not the market. A like or subscribe is welcome if you feel it, but don't rush. Keep this awareness with you and let it guide your mind, your emotions, and your decisions.